The wind howled like a wounded wolf across the frozen Wyoming plains, scraping over the cracked chimney of Elijah Boone's cabin and screaming through the shutters as if it sought shelter too. Snow whipped sideways, thick as smoke, erasing everything beyond the front porch. Elijah sat near the fire, a cup of black coffee in one hand, Winchester resting across his lap like an old friend. The storm had crept in fast, just like all trouble did out here, sudden, mean, and full of teeth. Then came the knock. Not the kind of hesitant, neighborly tap of someone asking for salt or a dry place to sleep. This was urgent, rapid, desperate, heavy. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. He didn't move right away. Trouble sometimes wore a friendly face, but it never came calling quiet. The knock came again. He stood slowly, joints aching from old wounds and older regrets. His boots scraped over pine floorboards. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and dust, the same 3 scents it always did. When he opened the door, a wall of snow pushed in like a ghost trying to get warm. And standing inside it, shivering and gaunt, was a woman wrapped in a sodden cloak, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. Behind her, 3 children huddled in silence. No horses, no wagon, just feet buried in snow and a look that said they'd come as far as they could. "I don't give handouts," Elijah said. "We don't need charity," the woman replied, voice firm but cracking like thin ice. "Just one night. We'll leave come sunrise." He stared at her, eyes flicking to each child. The eldest boy couldn't have been more than 12, his jaw clenched like a man twice his age. A girl, maybe 8, clutched a frayed doll. The smallest, a boy around 4, didn't look up at all, just swayed slightly in the wind, like a sapling barely rooted. "You got a name?" Elijah asked, already stepping aside. "Claire," she said, pushing the children inside. "Whitlow." The fire's heat closed around them. The children moved like ghosts, unsure whether to collapse or keep pretending they weren't cold. Claire knelt by the fire, removing their wet layers with practiced hands. Her fingers were red and raw. Elijah shut the door and turned the bolt. "There's coffee. Beans if you can cook." She didn't thank him, just nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Cataloging, planning, like someone used to not trusting her luck. He watched them eat in silence. The girl, May, Claire called her, asked questions between bites. What was that rifle? Why did the fire crackle funny? Was that a real bear pelt on the wall? The eldest, Henry, watched Elijah with the guarded look of a boy who'd been the man of the house too long. The youngest didn't speak at all. After dinner, Elijah stood by the hearth, arms folded. "Storm won't let up till morning. You can have the loft. Don't touch anything on the workbench." Claire nodded. "We won't be trouble." He grunted, unconvinced. Later, after the cabin had gone still, Elijah stayed by the fire. He didn't sleep much anymore. Dreams had teeth. His eyes drifted to the window. Snow had blanketed the land in a matter of hours. Nothing moved, except a flicker. He narrowed his eyes. Deep in the treeline, just past the barn, a shadow pulled back. It could have been wind in the branches. Could have been. He stood slowly, lifted the Winchester. Outside, the cold slapped him like a debt collector. He moved carefully, boots crunching over snow. The barn stood silent and dark. A lantern swayed faintly inside, casting long shapes across the floor. He stepped in. It wasn't the horses that alerted him. They were calm, snorting softly. It was the wagon. Half covered with canvas, something tucked in behind the crates didn't belong. Elijah pulled the tarp back slowly. Blood. Dry but recent. A saddlebag torn open, stained dark. And inside it papers. Maps. A deed. And gold. Not dust or flakes, solid coins. Stamped. Federal. He froze. Behind him, the snow crunched. He turned, fast, rifle raised. Claire stood there, coat open, lips tight. "You were supposed to be sleeping," Elijah said flatly. "I figured you'd find it." He didn't lower the gun. "Explain." She stepped forward, slow. "My husband, he worked for a land broker. Southern Railroad. Found oil where they weren't supposed to be looking. Didn't tell the company. Made a deal. Then someone put a bullet in him, and I ran." "Elaborate," Elijah snapped. "There's a deed to oil land 3 states east. Worth more than all of Fort Laramie. But there's men, bounty riders, who want it quiet. They want us dead." Elijah exhaled through his nose. "You brought that mess here." "I brought my children where no one would think to follow. We were headed to Montana. The storm." "You lied to me," he cut in. I protected my family, she said, stepping closer. Same thing. He stared at her, eyes unreadable. They'll come. They already are. She nodded toward the trees. Elijah moved past her, stepped out into the snow. He scanned the ridge, the bare trunks beyond the creek. And there, near a crooked juniper, he saw it, a glint. A rifle barrel catching the last bit of moonlight. They were being watched. He lowered the Winchester slowly. When he turned back, Claire stood firm in the barn doorway, hands clenched at her sides. You should leave, he said, and freeze with 3 children. This isn't a sanctuary. It's a coffin waiting for its nails. Claire didn't blink. Then maybe you should teach me where to swing the hammer. They stared at each other for a long, tense beat, 2 people cut from stubborn cloth, fraying at the edges. A rustle from the hayloft. Henry, holding the cavalry pistol that Elijah kept locked in the drawer beneath his bed. I ain't letting 'em take us, the boy said. Elijah's mouth tightened. You don't know what you're saying. I know what dying looks like, Henry replied, voice breaking only once. The old frontiersman studied him, then looked at Claire, then toward the trees. Storm wasn't letting up. The sky was bleeding dusk into black. Wolves would move soon. But wasn't wolves that worried him. It was men. Desperate men with reasons to kill. He shut the barn door and latched it. Inside, the cabin was dim. The fire had died down to coals. The girl was asleep by the hearth, doll cradled like a pistol. The youngest boy lay wrapped in Elijah's old army blanket, chest rising and falling slow. He didn't belong in this. He hadn't asked for it. But something about the way that mute boy had taken his hand earlier, quiet, certain, had sunk into a place Elijah thought long buried. He sat in his chair and poured another cup of coffee. Claire sat across from him this time. No words, just the fire and the wind outside. Minutes passed like years. Then Elijah spoke. They'll come tonight. Claire didn't flinch. I know. We'll need to move the kids to the cellar. She nodded. You know how to use that pistol? He asked Henry without looking. I can learn. Elijah's jaw twitched. You'll stay hidden. That's your job. Guard your sisters. The boy said nothing, but his grip tightened. Elijah rose and opened a wooden chest near the hearth. Inside, traps a field kit, a sawed-off shotgun he hadn't touched since Gettysburg. He laid them out on the table one by one. Claire moved beside him. Together, they began preparing, not like strangers, but like survivors. And somewhere in the dark beyond the tree-line, a match was struck. A voice whispered orders. A figure slipped off his saddle and began creeping forward. The first snowflake of war had fallen. The cellar beneath Elijah's cabin wasn't much, stone-lined, low ceiling, musty with old memories and colder than the grave, but was secure. The trapdoor beneath the rug was well hidden, and the wood beam that sealed it shut had held firm through 2 winters and a blizzard that broke half the county. Claire lowered the children inside with quiet, deliberate hands, wrapping them in every blanket they could spare. May clung to her mother's sleeve, silent now, her chatter snuffed out by fear. The youngest, still speechless, pressed his face against Claire's shoulder and didn't move. Elijah stood by the door, listening. No sound but the wind. But that didn't mean anything. The worst of men came quiet. Keep them still, he said to Claire without turning. Don't come out unless I say. I'm not hiding while you fight, she whispered sharply. You're not dying while they watch, he replied, glancing at her over his shoulder. Let me hold the line. You hold them. She hesitated, then nodded once, like a soldier accepting orders. Elijah dropped the beam into place and rolled the rug back over it. The room felt emptier without their breath, but heavier too. Outside, snow thickened. Wind screamed through the trees like it knew what was coming. Elijah checked the shotgun, then tucked the Winchester against the wall by the window. He lit the lantern and turned down the flame, casting the room in shadows just deep enough to hide in. He didn't know how many there were. 3, maybe 4. Could be more. Could be less. But men like this didn't knock first. They didn't talk. They just came. At the barn, the horses started to stir. Not panicked, just restless. That told him what he needed to know. He moved to the back window, cracked it open an inch. Cold air spilled in, bringing the scent of pine and gun oil. Somewhere in that blackness, boots moved over snow, deliberate and slow. A twig snapped. They were in position. He reached for the string beside the door, tugged at once. A bell barely audible from the cellar below. Claire would know that meant stay down. Then the first voice called out. Come. Smug. "Evening, friend. Ain't no call for blood tonight. Just here for what's owed." Elijah said nothing. Moved to the front window. Shadows shifted along the porch. One figure visible, maybe two more at his flanks. A distraction. "Folks you're hiding belong to us. Got a claim. Legal even. You give 'em up, we ride on. You keep 'em well." Elijah opened the door before the sentence finished. One man stood just past the threshold, broad-shouldered, duster flapping in the wind, revolver low at his side. Long mustache. Thin eyes. Arrogant like he'd never missed a shot in his life. Elijah said nothing. Just stepped out, hands empty. "You Boone?" the man asked. "You looking for Boone?" Elijah returned flatly. The man smirked. "I'm looking for a woman stole what didn't belong to her. And I heard she's in that cabin." Elijah nodded once. "You heard wrong." The man tilted his head. "Now that ain't polite." "I'm not polite." Behind the speaker, two other men stepped into view. One carried a sawed-off, the other a Henry rifle. All three were that look, like wolves who thought the herd was asleep. The speaker clicked his tongue. "Now listen here. You hand her over, you get to keep breathing. Maybe we even leave the place standing." Elijah didn't blink. "You got names?" The man grinned. "Ain't relevant." "It is," Elijah said, eyes cold. "I like to know who I'm burying." The grin faltered. That's when the first shot came. It wasn't from Elijah. It came from the trees. A misstep. A trigger pull too soon. A crack echoed through the valley, and a bullet punched through the porch rail inches from Elijah's thigh. In a blink, he ducked and rolled, shotgun already up. The blast ripped through the duster man's chest, sending him sprawling into the snow, mouth open in surprise. The other two opened fire, one hitting the doorframe, the other grazing Elijah's shoulder. He hit the deck, rolled behind the barrel near the firewood pile, and chambered another round. One down. Two pissed. More coming. Inside the cabin, Claire heard it all, the gunfire, the crash, the screams. She pressed the children closer and whispered calming lies into their hair. Henry sat beside her, fists clenched, teeth gritted. Above them, the floor groaned. Elijah kicked the door shut, ducked back inside, and reloaded fast. His shoulder bled, but he didn't feel it. Pain could wait. Then came the crash, back window, shattered inward. Someone was trying to flank. He spun, fired once, and missed. A man came through the window in a blur, scruffy young, too cocky. Elijah slammed the shotgun across his face, sent him staggering. The man raised a knife. The knife never landed. Claire burst from the cellar, a cast-iron skillet in her hand, and brought it down on the intruder's skull. He dropped like a sack of corn. "I told you to stay down." Elijah barked. "They found another way in," she snapped. They stared at each other, breath ragged. Behind them, the cabin walls shook as another round struck outside. "They'll burn it," Claire said. "Let 'em try." Together, they dragged the unconscious attacker to the cellar and dumped him beside the kids. Claire kissed May's forehead and locked eyes with Henry. "Stay down, no matter what." Elijah handed her the pistol. "You shoot if you see boots." She nodded, took it with steady hands. Then he was gone, back into the snowstorm, shotgun in one hand, hat pulled low. He moved through the dark like a ghost, flanking his own cabin. A shape moved between trees, a rider, circling wide. Elijah raised the gun, then hesitated. It was a boy, no older than Henry. Rifle too big for his frame. Looking scared. Looking like someone forced to prove himself. Elijah lowered the barrel. "Go home, kid," he called out. "This ain't your fight." The boy startled, looked his way, and ran. Vanished into the trees. Cowards could live. He turned back toward the cabin. Smoke curled from behind it. "They lit the barn," he muttered, breaking into a run. Flames licked the rafters, devouring wood with hungry crackles. The horses kicked and screamed inside. Elijah didn't hesitate. He threw open the barn doors, dashed through smoke, unlatched the stalls one by one. The beasts bolted, panicked but alive. Then he saw the man near the fire, crouched, match in hand, lighting a fuse. Crate of dynamite. Too late. Elijah tackled him just as the fuse sparked. The crate toppled, the man shouted, but Elijah grabbed the fuse, yanked it free. He slammed the man's head into the wall once. Twice. Done. Then silence. Just the crackle of fire. Distant shouts. The storm was breaking. He stumbled out of the barn, covered in soot, eyes stinging. Back at the cabin, Claire stood in the doorway, pistol raised. The last two men rode off, fast, not bothering to look back. Elijah fell to his knees. Claire rushed to him, dropped beside him in the snow. "You're hit." "Shoulder," he muttered. "Just red paint." He looked up at her. Eyes tired. Voice quiet. "They'll be back. With more." She nodded, hand on his chest. "Then we'll be ready." From the cellar, May's voice called out, trembling but steady. "Mama, is it over?" Claire turned toward the door, but Elijah touched her wrist, stopping her. "Wait," he said, voice gravel-soft. "Let them have this moment. Let them believe we won." And with it, a choice neither of them had dared name yet. The morning after the fire smelled like scorched pine and blood. The barn was a charred skeleton, smoldering at its edges, and the bodies of the men who hadn't fled lay face down in the snow, limbs stiff with the cold that hadn't yet let up. Elijah stood over them in silence, a shovel in one hand, smoke curling from his mouth. He didn't say a word, just started digging. Claire watched from the porch, arms wrapped around her children like a living shield. May wouldn't stop asking questions about the bang, the men, the blood, until her mother knelt and whispered something low, something final, and the little girl just nodded and sat down, silent. Henry, the oldest, stood at Claire's side now, jaw set like stone, fists balled at his sides, as if he could fight the whole world by sheer will alone. The youngest didn't understand any of it. He only cried when Elijah walked by without looking at him. It took 3 hours to dig the graves. No headstones, no words. Elijah dropped the bodies in without a prayer. Some men didn't earn them. When he finished, he wiped his brow and turned toward the cabin, not toward the smoke, but toward the door, the hearth, the warmth. Claire stood in it, framed by dawn, her face unreadable. "You could have run," she said. He didn't answer. "You had no reason to fight for us." Elijah spat into the dirt. "I had a reason." "What was it?" He didn't reply, just walked past her, boots dragging, ash across the floor. Inside, he sat down, wincing as the bandage over his shoulder pulled taut. Claire followed, closing the door behind her. "You still planning to send us away?" she asked. "That depends," he muttered. "On what?" "On how many more men that bastard brother of yours can send." She stiffened. "You believe him." "I believe he believed it." Claire sat across from him. Her eyes searched his, quiet but unyielding. "His name's Caleb. He's not my brother. He was my husband's cousin. Ran a little posse down in Sutter's Hollow. Thought the world owed him something after the war. My husband used to call him Vulture." Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "Why's he chasing you?" Claire looked down. "My husband was a surveyor. Bought land out west, mapped new routes for the rail. We thought we were finally getting ahead, just enough to build something for the kids. But Caleb, he didn't like us having anything he couldn't take. Claimed the land for himself. Came to collect." "What happened?" "I told him no." Elijah studied her face, then nodded once. "Good." She leaned in slightly, voice soft but sharp. "He's not going to stop. You know that, don't you?" "I do." Silence thickened between them. Then Elijah stood, grabbed his coat. "I've got a plan," he said. "It's a bad one, but it's all we've got." Claire arched an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "There's a bounty hunter 2 towns over. Name's Rusk. Drinks too much. Shoots straight. He's got a way of spreading word fast when the price is right. I'm going to pay him to leak a lie." "A lie?" Elijah nodded. "Tell him you're dead." Claire's breath caught. "You think that'll stop Caleb?" "No, but it might make him sloppy. And when he comes, we'll be waiting." She studied him for a long moment. "You're dragging us into a war." "I'm not dragging anyone. Doors open. You want to walk, you walk." Claire stood slowly. "You already know we won't." They rode out that afternoon. Elijah on horseback, Claire and the children packed into the wagon with what little hadn't burned. They didn't speak much. The trail wound through pine-laced valleys and rocky passes, and every so often Elijah would scan the horizon, hand near the butt of his pistol, waiting for something to shift. They stopped at nightfall in a place called Smoke Hollow, nothing more than a saloon, a general store, and a stable run by a toothless man who charged in whiskey instead of coin. Elijah handed him a bottle, and tossed a coin anyway. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with sweat and secrets. Rusk sat at a far table, nursing something that might have once been whiskey and now tasted more like regret. His coat was torn at the sleeves, but the rifle slung over his shoulder looked new. Elijah slid into the seat across from him. You owe me, he said. Russ grunted. I owe a lot of folks. This is different. Yeah. How? I want you to lie. Rusk squinted, took another drink. I'm listening, Doc. By the time Elijah laid out the plan, Rusk was grinning through cracked teeth. You want me to shout to every bounty board from here to Calaveras that the girl's dead? That her body's stinking in the ground, and I put it there. You say it with the right kind of swagger, they'll believe you. Rusk leaned in, suddenly serious. You know what happens if they don't. They will. Why are you doing this, Boone? You don't even know her. Elijah didn't flinch. She's got kids. That ain't an answer. It's the only one I got. Rusk laughed once, low and bitter. Damn. You went and grew a conscience. No, Elijah said. Just ran out of things worth living for. This might be one. The next morning, Rusk rode out with his lie tucked in his saddlebag like a loaded gun. Claire stood on the porch of a borrowed house just outside Smoke Hollow, holding her youngest as May and Henry played in the frost with sticks and laughter that didn't sound entirely broken anymore. They bought it, Elijah said, walking up beside her. First wire went out this morning. Should spread fast. Claire didn't look at him. What now? Now we draw the trap. We pick the ground, set the bait, and make sure it's not us who end up in the dirt. She turned toward him, eyes like flint. You ever lose someone, Elijah? He looked away. A long time ago. Wife. Fiancé. She never made it west. Claire nodded slowly, then looked out at the horizon. Then you know what it feels like to have nothing left. Elijah didn't answer, just stood there beside her as the wind picked up and the clouds rolled in thick and heavy. Behind them, Henry ran up, out of breath. Someone's coming. From the ridge road. Elijah snapped to attention. He stepped out past the porch and scanned the trail. 2 riders. Not Caleb. Lawmen. His jaw tightened. We need to move, he said. Why? Claire asked. They ain't here for us. But if they see you alive, it ruins the whole thing. Claire didn't hesitate. She handed the baby to Henry and turned toward the house. What do you want me to do? Back door. Cellar. Like before. She was already gone. The riders dismounted outside the saloon. Elijah met them on the boardwalk, hand resting casually on his holster. The taller of the two tipped his hat. You Elijah Boone? Depends, he said, the wind fluttering his coat. The shorter man stepped forward. We're looking for a woman. Name of Claire Whitlow. Heard she was seen on this trail. Elijah's face stayed flat. She's dead. You sure? I buried her myself. You want to see the grave? The 2 men exchanged glances. The taller one sighed. Just doing our job. She's got folks back east asking questions. Well, you can tell those folks they're a year too late. They lingered a moment longer, then mounted back up and rode off slow. Elijah didn't breathe again until they vanished over the ridge. He turned toward the house. Claire stood just inside the door watching. Their eyes met through the dim light. You sure you want to keep going? She asked. Elijah stepped forward. No, he said, but we're past turning back. Elijah said one word. Tonight. Snow began to fall again by the time the sun vanished behind the ridge. Not the soft, silent kind that cloaked the land in peace, but heavy flakes that smacked cold against the skin and gathered fast. Elijah stood in the barn loft, rifle braced against the window, eyes fixed on the road where the horizon trembled with motion. Shadows moved among the pines, 30 men at least, maybe more. No torches, no noise, just a rolling silence that pressed against the ribs like weight. Claire was in the house below, loading cartridges with quiet fingers, her children tucked behind a false wall he'd built that morning. Henry knew how to fire a pistol now, though he hadn't yet. Elijah hoped it stayed that way. May sat cross-legged beside her little brother, arms wrapped around him, whispering stories about the stars and horses made of light. Claire's hands shook just a little, but her eyes stayed sharp. They'd made the house look abandoned, doors unlatched, lanterns cold, hearth dead, but it wouldn't hold long. Caleb's men weren't the kind that knocked first. Rusk was late. He was supposed to be back by dusk, bringing with him 2 others who owed him favors and knew how to kill in the dark. But now, with that long silence broken by the distant jangle of bridles and snow-muffled hooves, Elijah knew they were on their own. He took a breath, exhaled steam, and whispered to himself, You got one job, Boone. Keep the wolves from the door. He climbed down the ladder and met Claire in the kitchen. They're splitting up, he said, half moving to flank the barn. half taking the front. Claire nodded. Trap the first. Kill the second. Exactly. She handed him a second revolver. For your left hand. I can barely shoot with my right. You'll need both. Then came the knock. One solid rap on the door. Like a dare. Claire's face went pale. Elijah took 2 steps forward and said loud enough to carry, "Ain't nobody here for conversation. You want the place, come take it." A pause. Then a man's voice, calm, cordial. "Elijah Boone. That's you. You know it is. You've got something belongs to me. That right. You've got my cousin's brat, and a piece of land you don't deserve." Elijah leaned in close to the door, lips brushing wood. "You'll get her over my corpse. That's the idea." Then hell broke loose. The back door blew inward in a spray of splinters. Claire ducked, rolled, came up firing. The first man threw caught a shot square to the gut and crumpled. Another slipped past her line and rushed the kitchen, blade out, until Elijah shot him in the throat and kicked the body sideways into the wall. Glass shattered behind them, gunfire from the barn. Elijah turned, grabbed Claire by the arm. "Go. Now." She ran for the trapdoor to the cellar, but a figure burst through the front, the silhouette of Caleb, tall and gaunt, eyes like rusted nails and mouth curled into something too smug for war. He held no weapon, not yet. "Elijah Boone," he drawled. "I heard you were a bastard. Didn't expect you to be such a fool." Elijah raised his pistol. "You're in my house. You made it my house the second you stole what was mine. Your claim died the day you sent those thugs after her." Caleb stepped forward, boots scraping ash into the floorboards. "She's a liar. Her husband owed me. You harbor her, you're harboring theft." "I ain't harboring anyone. She's free. You want to take something from me, you better pay in blood." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "So be it." Then he whistled. From the barn, a fire bloomed. Someone had torched the hay, and smoke gushed upward in a black tower. More gunfire, screaming, and suddenly the whole place lit up like judgment. Claire shouted from the cellar, "They're coming through the crawl space." Elijah spun and shot a man crawling from under the floorboards. The house shook with boots and bullets, and the walls splintered with return fire. Then, from out of the chaos, Henry's voice. "Mom." Claire turned, saw him halfway out of the hiding place, tears on his face. "Stay down," she screamed. But it was too late. A man grabbed the boy by the collar, yanked him upward. Claire screamed. Elijah moved faster than thought, diving through the doorframe, tackling the man into the woodpile, fist crashing into face, over and over until teeth clattered to the floor. Henry scrambled free. Then Elijah saw Caleb had moved. The outlaw stood now at the hearth, lifting something from the ashes. The fire poker, still red hot. "Elijah!" Claire cried, raising her gun. But Caleb was faster. He swung low, caught Elijah across the ribs. The heat branded skin, and Elijah screamed, dropping to one knee. Claire fired, but Caleb ducked, fast as a snake, and vanished into the smoke. More men poured in. 2 through the windows, 1 through the attic hole. Claire covered the children. Elijah rose, blood on his side, pain grinding bone. He shot the first attacker, then the second. The third he hit with the butt of the revolver, so hard it bent. The house was dying around them. Flames caught on curtains, then timber. A support beam fell in the back room with a crash that deafened. But Elijah saw only one thing, Caleb running toward the back door. He chased. Outside, the storm had turned wild, snow falling sideways, wind howling through the trees like ghosts. Caleb ran through it all, heading for the ridge trail. Elijah followed, slipping, lungs burning, ribs cracked. He heard Claire's voice behind him, calling his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. He caught Caleb on the slope, tackled him into the snow. The 2 men rolled, fists flying, boots kicking. Caleb pulled a knife. Elijah grabbed his wrist. They struggled, snarling, slipping in the white. "I should have killed her myself," Caleb spat. Elijah twisted hard. The knife plunged into Caleb's own chest. The outlaw froze. Blood bubbled from his lips. He fell back into the snow, eyes wide with disbelief. Elijah stood, swaying. Then a shot rang out. He stumbled. Claire was behind him, pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Behind her, one last man, fallen now with a hole through his skull. "I had it," Elijah murmured. She stepped forward. "I didn't know that." He gave a soft laugh, then coughed. They stood there in the storm, surrounded by bodies and flame-lit, ash falling like snow. Back at the house, what was left of it crackled and popped as the roof began to collapse inward. But the cellar door held. The children were safe. The battle was over. For now, they buried the bodies in silence. No words, no crosses, just stones over shallow graves and wind to carry the names away. Claire stood over Caleb's grave a long while. Then she looked at Elijah. What now? He looked to mountains. Now we start over. She nodded. And if someone else comes? He met her eyes. Then we end it the same way. Behind them, the snow kept falling, but it was quieter now. Lighter, as if the land had exhaled. Elijah turned toward the rebuilt wagon, toward the children who waited inside. He climbed up onto the seat. Claire joined him. They rode west. Not because they had a destination, but because nothing was left behind. Only wind and dust.